On our podcast side, we've been covering A Hero no Sora, a 2003 manga and 2019 anime, on the good old basket of balls. Now, we're no stranger to covering basketball series, as we've covered Slam Dunk in the past, but that did get me thinking. Slam Dunk has been traditionally known to be the grandfather of modern basketball series, and for the most part has served as a measuring stick that most tend to rate current series against. But what exactly is the timeline of basketball manga? Was Slam Dunk the first? Is every other a bastardization? So today we'll cover this as I present to you the comprehensive history of basketball animes and manga, starting with what I call the Stone Age. Slam Dunk was the first, is what I would have loved to say, but that just isn't true. While Slam Dunk would come out in 1990 and lead the world in a new direction for basketball, the privilege for the first basketball consistently published series was back in 1979 with Noboru Rokuda's Dash Kappei, first published in Weekly Shonen Sunday. Now, Dash Kappei, henceforth referred to as Dash, as it's just a better name, is an interesting take on basketball. While the story mainly started out following our main character Kappei involvement with his high school basketball team, due to its heavy emphasis on the comedic aspect of its storytelling, the story quickly devolved into a comedy/joke series, eventually going off the wall and having little to nothing to do with basketball. With that said, it did start off as a basketball series, and with the context of future inarguably better basketball series out there, I can already start seeing some interesting parallels, some tangential, while others are more one-to-one. Kappei is a short and energetic person who joins the Seirin high school basketball team due to in heavy part to the love of girl panties. There's really only so many story settings you can do in a basketball series, so we can argue whether A Hero no Sora adopted some of its small main character characteristics, but Seirin High is indeed the name of the school in Kuroko no Basket. While I think that Dash deserves some recognition for its role in inducting basketball to pen and paper, I would actually dissuade you from reading the manga or watching its 1981 anime adaptation, as your brain cells might actually melt as you experience it further into the story. However, Dash did show that for a while basketball would serve more as a side dressing to storytelling purposes, as in Dash's case it was more of a comedy series with a tiny hint of basketball. The next basketball series on our list would treat the sport somewhat similarly. Keiko Honda's Tsuki no Yoru Hoshi no Asa, or Evening Moon Morning Star, was a short-lived 1983 shoujo manga where two cousins who once promised themselves to each other as kids find themselves separated through time but will reunite a decade later as the best players in their respective basketball teams. Now, I'm no shoujo specialist, but I think this was a pretty middling read and overall kind of boring. 2 years later, Fuyumi Soryu's boyfriend would start serialization again, and this will fall strictly into the shoujo romance genre, with there being an overarching plot between a young hotshot and a hopeless romantic. I will say reading this was an interesting experience. The story is not bad, but in the context of basketball, the plot was set up as a sandwich with the front part and the back part being the basketball buttons, and the middle part being incredibly dense with romance and slice of life drama. I remember in parts of my reading journey, I began asking myself where exactly the basketball went. While the art is one that takes time to love, I do really appreciate its representation of the game of basketball itself. While most would think that we are now reaching what is widely considered the grandfather of basketball series, there's actually another noteworthy basketball series by the name of Dear Boys, first coming out in 1989. While on the surface the series is riddled with very high school boy kind of humor, with the MC flipping skirts and doing whatever he wants, hidden behind all that is the fundamental of a passionate basketball player turning around the fate of a doomed basketball club that has fallen to ruins with members that have long since given up. With all that said, Dear Boys was a huge leap forward when it comes to the sport itself, and for what feels like the first time, more emphasis has been put on the relationship between team members rather than a team member and some outside source. First coming out in 1989, the original series went on for a solid 8 years, concluding in volume 23. Since then, however, the series continued on with a prequel, Dear Boys The Early Days, coming out in 1997, a sequel, Dear Boys Act 2, in the same year, Act 3 in 2008, and another sequel, Dear Boys Over Time, in 2016, and finally, at the time of this video's release, the series is still ongoing, with Dear Boys Act 4 since 2018, with Act 4 now being released on a monthly basis. For those who want to go back in the history of basketball manga for the love of the sport, Dear Boys is what I would say is the best place to start. Then we come to the series that most would consider the grandpapa of basketball manga, the one, the only Slam Dunk. Well, it all started in and around the same period as Dear Boy. Slam Dunk allowed the audience to follow on a weekly basis a hot-blooded, talented, but unruly character that comes to fall in love with the sport of basketball and subsequently drags readers along with him. Depicting blood-pumping plays with fantastic art and exhibiting the love of the sport, Slam Dunk has since cemented itself as the greatest pillar of basketball mangas. To this day, Slam Dunk is a phenom. With 170 million copies in circulation, the series is currently the 7th best-selling manga in history, outclassing the likes of Demon Slayer, Attack on Titan, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and even Bleach. In fact, in more recent times, a movie named The First Slam Dunk came out in 2022. 32 years since the series first debuted and 26 since it has ended, and has been a hit at the box office, raking in over $275 million worldwide and cementing it as the 5th highest grossing Japanese film ever. With its iconic red jersey sporting the name Shohoku, the series' popularity alongside the rise of Japan's interest in the NBA over in America at the same time created the perfect storm for the sport to rise as one of the premier sports of the country. Heck, in 2010, the legendary author of the series, Takehiko Inu, received special commendation from the Japan Basketball Association for helping popularize the sport in the country. It wouldn't be an over-exaggeration to say that Slam Dunk opened the floodgates to the basketball genre, and we'll see a larger and larger number of them appear of varying quality and premises. I won't cover all of them, and will instead go through those I find most important for our timeline. Harlem Beat was a 1994 manga that pivoted away from high school basketball that seemed to be becoming the status quo of the time, and instead focus on street basketball. And as an example of to see how the NBA specifically also became a source of inspiration, the series makes mention of the then most popular and best players and their signature moves. Had those players not remained some of the most legendary to play the game, these mentions would have felt out of time, but luckily remains quite cheeky to read as you go. I will say the story felt rather unstructured and ranks on the lower half of the basketball mangas that we'll talk about in this timeline in my opinion, but still a noteworthy mention nonetheless. While over the video so far, I have put emphasis on the sport of basketball and its importance to a basketball manga on a pedestal, I do want to say that there is place to infuse something else into a series to keep it relevant. In a weird way, if every basketball manga was just a good basketball manga, oddly none of them as a result would stand out. As such, I'm perfectly okay when a series like Isle comes around and infuses a little bit of slice of life into things. This 1995 manga came from the angle of those who fell out of the sport either intentionally or unintentionally, who still want to give it another go for the pure love of the sport. I actually found this to be rather enjoyable as a read, though I do find the title frustrating when trying to recommend it to other folks. Slam Dunk's mangaka comes in hot again with his next basketball series, Real, in 1999. This time around, he takes a different angle on basketball, focusing on wheelchair basketball. If you felt that a weakness of Slam Dunk were the character moments, boy oh boy does he deliver with character moments. Every character here will have gone through struggles and pain that we will be able to have a glimpse into, yet find solace in a shared passion for wheelchair basketball. I know it's a hard sell, but I highly recommend this series, perhaps controversially, even over the author's more famous work. In the same way slice of life finds its way sometimes, romance can too. 2002's crossover was not exactly good, but would be a resume builder for one of my favorite / most hated mangakas ever, Seo Koji. While I do want to rephrase that in saying that the series was not bad for the most part, I also felt it was somewhat vanilla and lost its way a little too often for my liking. And by 2003, our next hit series would arrive in Ahiru no Sora, with the main character that seems to be the antithesis to a modeled athlete for the sport. This story played into the dynamics of a mid to low level basketball team that still wanted to play and win, even when all the chips are stacked against them. We actually covered the series in our podcast, so give that a listen if you want our full thoughts. I do want to forewarn you that while it is a long running series still technically being ongoing, the series has been on hiatus since 2019, so don't fall in love with these characters because frankly, it is quite easy to come to like these characters. To me, 2008's Kuroko no Basket marked the beginning of the modern era of basketball, and it succeeded in showing the sport in one important angle, as an entertainment product. While it's romantic to love the sport as some kind of art, at the end of the day, sports at the highest level, such as the NBA, is a product to be sold to viewers, and what Kuroko no Basket understood was that the spectacle matters. Taking the Mario Kart approach to racing and incorporating it to basketball, the series presented a super team, and then broke them up, pitting turning all of these competitive members into a head-to-head for supremacy. A simple but highly effective premise, but by giving each player in the story, big or small, some kind of ability, at times falling into the supernatural camp, the series reimagined the formula of basketball manga and knocked it out of the park. You know you made it as a series when you're implicated in a nationwide terrorist incident involving yaoi fan art, but that's a story for another time. At the end of the day, Kuroko showed that to succeed in the competitive world of manga, much like in the world of basketball, you can't just be good, you have to be special. For a bit, Kuroko dominated the basketball corner. The only noteworthy contender was 2010's Dragon Jam, who focused on streetball. Unfortunately, the series never quite made it to the West and remains hard to find much discussion about, even if you were a fan. With that said, the art in the series is fantastic, and fingers crossed it gets an anime someday to generate hype here in the West. As we head deeper into the 2010s, the internet slowly allowed cross-border pollination to a newfound level, with the rise of webtoons coming from both South Korea and China. While on paper this shouldn't affect the manga world, the reality is that now with a buffet of content at our disposal, mangas also need to compete for eyeballs, and will require compelling stories to continue garnering attention. Whether direct or not, if we exclude the mainstay still ongoing and chugging along, newcomer basketball manga struggled greatly in the late 2010s. While some low-key surprises like Switch, which introduced a brotherly rivalry, and Tsubame Tip-Off, which presented female basketball players, may be worth a mention, the back half of the 2010s was not a good place for basketball manga. While for a bit there we were trending downwards, much like the NBA draft's up-and-coming rookies, there are quite a few noteworthy basketball mangas that seem to be on the up and up. And although most of them aren't established just yet, I don't think it would be a surprise if one of them breaks through any time now. In order to be able to flaunt it somewhere in the future for having called it, let's quickly take a look at these up-and-comers. Deep 3 is a spin on the idea of yips, while Quarters like if the Fast and Furious franchise was based on basketball. Alba no Basketball is a story of finding your strengths as a player. Winning Pass is a classic tale of competing brothers. Finally, Blue Law imagines what basketball could look like in 3 to 4 more decades. I'm sure with a few more years time under our belt, we'll look back to see that a number of these did not really make it, but it only took one to start the golden age, and it might only take one to start a new age. Thanks for watching.